This story is not meant for everyone. Some of you will stop halfway through. Some of you will stay until the end, but you won't leave the same way you came in. The town that doesn't exist. If you drive west out of Rachel, Nevada, and keep going, past the "No Trespassing" signs, you'll hit a stretch of road the maps don't bother to name. It's just asphalt and dust, disappearing into a horizon of empty desert. I've been down that road twice. Once as a curious traveler, the second time as someone who knew better. The first thing you notice out there isn't the heat, it's the silence. No birds, no insects, no distant hum of traffic, just the wind, carrying with it a dry, metallic taste, the kind that clings to the back of your throat. Locals call the place Black Hollow, not because it's black, the sand there is the same pale gold as anywhere else, but because, according to them, it's a hole in reality, a place where things vanish. They'll tell you it's just a story. They're lying. The incident. It started with a missing trucker. February 2019. A man named Jonathan Pike radioed his dispatcher around 11:47 p.m., saying he'd pulled over near mile marker 17 because he saw something in the sky. His voice, according to the recording, was steady, calm, curious. And then, nothing. By the time law enforcement reached the spot, the truck was there. Engine running, lights on, no Jonathan, no tracks in the sand. And, this is the part they don't put in the report, his radio was still transmitting. On the other end, the dispatcher swears she could hear breathing. The investigation. I went out there a week later. Not as a journalist, not as an investigator, just a man who's seen enough to know when a story isn't just a story. At mile marker 17, the desert looked ordinary, too ordinary. The sand was undisturbed, smooth as if the wind had erased every trace of what happened. But here's the thing, wind leaves patterns, ripples. You can tell when nature has done the work. This was different. The surface wasn't rippled. It was flat, perfectly flat, like glass. I walked 200 yards out into that unnatural smoothness, no footprints behind me, no sound but my own breathing. And then I felt it, a vibration, low, steady, coming up through the soles of my boots. I pressed my ear to the ground. At first, nothing. Then, faint, like hearing a train. That night, I stayed in the only motel in Rachel. The owner didn't ask questions, didn't even ask my name, just handed me the key and told me, "Lock the window, no matter what." Around 2:14 a.m., I woke up. Not because of a noise, because of the absence of noise. The hum was gone. Instead, there was something else, a pressure in the air, like the room was shrinking, the kind you feel right before a thunderstorm, except the sky outside was clear. I checked the lock, secure, curtains drawn, but then, from the other side of the glass, I heard it. "You shouldn't have come here." It wasn't loud, it wasn't even threatening, but it was inside my head. What I saw. In the morning, I drove back out. The sand at mile marker 17 wasn't smooth anymore. It was torn up, gouged in deep, spiraling patterns, as if something enormous had twisted its way to the surface and then gone back under. There were no vehicles, no people, but at the center of one of those spirals, I found something, half buried in the dirt. A piece of metal, no bigger than a coin, cold to the touch, even in the sun. And etched into it were markings, not letters, not numbers. I've been around languages my whole life. I've never seen anything like it. When I brought it close to my ear, I swear I could hear the same hum from the night before, only faster, sharper, almost impatient. The silence after. I left Black Hollow that afternoon, and I would have left it all behind, the missing trucker, the perfect sand, the hum, if it wasn't for what happened 3 days later. A plain white envelope arrived at my apartment, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. It was a grainy shot of the desert, and in the distance, almost lost in the blur, was a figure, tall, too tall, and standing exactly where I'd found the metal fragment. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 3 words: "We see you." Why this channel exists. That's why I'm here. Over the years, I've gathered stories like this from across the world. Some come from official reports buried in government archives. Some come from people who will never speak publicly again. And some come from places that no longer exist on any map. This channel, Parallel Shadow, is where those stories live, the ones you're not supposed to hear, the ones that sound like nightmares until they start happening to you. We'll travel to forgotten towns, abandoned facilities, and places where reality bends. We'll dig through classified files, intercepted transmissions, and whispers that were never meant. Before we begin, understand this. Once you start listening to these stories, you can't unhear them. Once you see what's in the shadows, you can't go back to pretending it's not there. So if you decide to stay, do so knowing you've crossed a line. Not one drawn on a map. One drawn deep inside yourself. Welcome to Parallel Shadow. If you're hearing this, it means I'm already gone. 18. Chapter 1. The Message. I was halfway through a lukewarm cup of diner coffee when the email came in. No subject line, no sender name, just a string of numbers in the address bar like someone had slammed their fist onto a keyboard. The body was even stranger. 37 degrees 14 minutes north. 115 degrees 48 minutes west. Midnight. Come alone. D. The coordinates pointed to the Nevada desert just north of Groom Lake. I didn't need to Google it. Everyone who's ever dug too deep into the rabbit holes of military secrecy knows what's there. Area 51. And D? I knew him. I hadn't seen Daniel Reese in over 15 years, not since he'd vanished after his discharge from the Air Force. Back then, he'd hinted at things he'd seen in the desert, things that didn't belong to this world. 18. That night. The desert was colder than I remembered. The sky stretched out, a black ocean full of dead stars. My old pickup groaned as I drove, headlights barely cutting through the dust. The diner appeared like a mirage, a single neon sign buzzing in the dark. Betty's. Inside, it smelled of stale coffee and old cigarette smoke. A waitress in a faded pink uniform glanced up at me but didn't smile. In the back booth, Daniel sat hunched over a cup. He looked older, thinner. His hair was longer, his eyes bloodshot. "Thought you were dead," I said, sliding in across from him. "Not yet," he muttered. His voice was cracked, dry, like he'd swallowed sand. He glanced around, checking the corners. "But I will be, if they know I'm talking to you." 18. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, battered cassette tape, the kind nobody uses anymore. He pushed it across the table. "What's on it?" "Proof," he whispered. "Proof they're hiding more than anyone imagines. Not just aircraft, not just tech. Something older. Something that's been here longer than us. The air between us felt heavier. I didn't touch the tape. Daniel leaned forward, his face inches from mine. There's a hangar under Groom Lake. They call it the Black Hangar. No windows. No air vents. The walls, they hum. Like the whole building is alive. What's inside? The bell over the door jingled. Daniel froze. A man in a dark suit walked in, too clean, too polished for a desert diner. His eyes swept the room once, then landed on us. Daniel shoved the tape into my hand. Urgent. If I don't make it out. Do. Chapter 2. Static. I didn't call the cops. The thought crossed my mind, sure, but it was gone as quickly as it came. If Daniel was right, and if they were listening, then the cops wouldn't help me. Hell, they might even hand me over. I stepped out of the diner, the night air biting at my face. The desert was a vast black void stretching in every direction. No cars on the road, no sound but the wind scraping across sand. It felt like the whole world had paused, like I was standing inside a photograph. My boots crunched on gravel as I crossed to my truck. The neon sign above the diner flickered, buzzing louder than it should have. I swear the light dimmed for a second, and in that blink, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the highway, watching me. When I looked again, there was nothing. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors, not that it would do much good against whoever the hell had just put a bullet in Daniel's head. My hands were slick with his blood, the cassette tape still warm from where he'd shoved it into my palm. I sat there a moment, listening. Nothing but the faint hiss of the wind against the truck's frame. Finally, I pulled the tape player from the glove compartment, an old Sony Walkman I hadn't touched in years. My fingers hesitated at the buttons. I felt like once I pressed play, something irreversible would happen. But I pressed it anyway. At first, just static, soft, rhythmic, like waves rolling over a distant shore. I turned the volume up, straining to catch anything beneath it. And then I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Deliberate, ragged, not like someone winded or panicked, but measured, controlled, as if whoever or whatever it was wanted me to know they were there. Then a voice, muffled and shaky. Day 173. Subject remains in containment. Temperature unknown. It speaks less now, only when the lights go out. I held the player close, my ear pressed against the foam of the headphones. There was a pause, the sound of shuffling papers, and then, beneath the voice, something else. At first I thought it was feedback, but the longer I listened, the more certain I was. This wasn't machine noise. This was speech. Not in English, not in any language I knew. It was deep and wet, like syllables formed inside a throat not made for human words. The two voices overlapped, the human one reading measurements and notes, the inhuman one whispering something low and hungry. I don't remember hitting stop. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the player. I sat there in the dark for minutes, staring at the dashboard. When I finally started the engine, the headlights caught something in the distance. Maybe 30. Its body was too long, its legs too thin. And it didn't move when the light hit it, didn't flinch, just stood there, head tilted, watching me. Then, without breaking eye contact, it stepped backward into the shadows. But the way it moved wasn't right, like it was being pulled smoothly by invisible strings. Back at the motel, I locked the door and pulled the curtains tight. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the truck, listening to that Whisper. Not words. Not exactly. More like a shape in my mind. Something vast, coiled, and patient. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. No caller ID. Against every shred of common sense, I answered. You have something that doesn't belong to you. The voice was flat, male, calm. No threat in the tone. But something about the way they said it made my stomach twist. The line went dead before I could respond. That's when I noticed the sound. The tape player, the one I'd left on the nightstand, was running. I hadn't pressed play. I hadn't even put the cassette back in. And yet, the headphones were whispering. Whispering. It wasn't like falling into a hole. It was like being pulled through reality itself, as if the ground had become a membrane and I was sinking through it. My vision fractured into shards of color and sound. I could hear whispers, hundreds of them, and I understood none, yet somehow I knew they were about me. When I came to, I was lying on a cold metal floor. The air smelled sterile, electric. A low light pulsed from somewhere above. I tried to stand, but my body felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. That's when I saw the walls. They were covered in photographs, hundreds of them. Some were of the town, some were of people, their faces blurred. And in the center of one wall was me. Standing at the edge of the forest from earlier that night, I never took that photo. Chapter 3. Inside the silence. I stepped forward, my boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. The air was unnaturally still, too still, as though the wind itself refused to cross the invisible boundary I had just stepped over. Behind me, the faint outline of the forest dissolved into a gray mist. Ahead, the town lay in complete silence. The houses were intact, but wrong. Their proportions subtly distorted, the angles too sharp, as if the architecture had been sketched by someone who had never actually seen a home before. Windows were black voids, no curtains, no furniture, only darkness. I reached for my flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, but failed to illuminate anything beyond a few feet. The fog seemed to swallow light. My chest tightened. I told myself it was just the cold, but deep down, I knew better. Somewhere in the distance, a sound broke the silence. A low metallic hum. It wasn't mechanical, exactly. More like the resonance of something alive, vibrating through the ground. I felt it in my teeth. I followed the hum, past houses with peeling paint and cracked doors, until I reached the center of town. That's when I saw it. A tall, steel structure that didn't belong here. Its design was alien, not in the cliché flying saucer sense, but in the way it seemed grown rather than built. The surface shimmered faintly, even without sunlight. There were no signs of life, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted to the windows around me. All still dark, all still empty, but I swore I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Shadows shifting. Then I noticed the ground. It wasn't dirt, it was glass. Beneath my feet, shapes writhed in slow motion, distorted as if viewed through water. Faces pressed against the surface from below, their mouths open in silent screams. Surprised, I stumbled backward, heart pounding, trying not to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. A sudden, sharp click echoed behind me. I froze. The hum stopped. And then, voices. They weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking anything I recognized. The syllables were layered, overlapping, like multiple people talking at once but out of sync. My flashlight flickered violently. I turned, and that's when I saw them. Not quite human. Tall, thin, limbs too long, skin the color of pale ash. Their eyes, if they were eyes, reflected the beam of my flashlight like an animal's, but there was intelligence in them. They didn't move toward me. They didn't need to. I suddenly realized the fog was thicker now, curling around my legs like cold fingers. It wasn't like falling into a hole, it was like being pulled through reality itself, as if the ground had become a membrane and I was sinking through it. My vision fractured into shards of color and sound. I could hear whispers, hundreds of them, and I understood none, yet somehow I knew they were about me. When I came to, I was lying on a cold metal floor. The air smelled sterile, electric. A low light pulsed from somewhere above. I tried to stand, but my body felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. That's when I saw the walls. They were covered in photographs, hundreds of them. Some were of the town, some were of people, their faces blurred. And in the center of one wall was me. Standing at the edge of the forest from earlier that night, I never took that photo. Chapter 4. The Shadow Line. The desert night is different when you know you're somewhere you shouldn't be. It doesn't feel open anymore. It feels narrow, like the sky itself is pressing down on you, flattening your thoughts. That was how it felt when I stepped out of the truck and saw the fence again, tall, razor-tipped, with a faint shimmer of heat still lingering from the day. Except there was no sun anymore. Just moonlight that seemed almost too white, too clean, as if it was shining through glass. I wasn't supposed to be here, not again, not after the warning. But the pull was stronger now. I needed answers. The silence wasn't silent. When you spend enough time in the desert, you learn the sounds. Distant coyotes, the hiss of wind through dry grass, the sudden skitter of something small moving over sand. This was different. It was like there was another sound layered over everything else, a low, electrical hum that you didn't hear with your ears exactly. You felt it through your bones, and it was coming from inside the fence. I found a place where the wire sagged just enough for me to slip a small camera through. No guards, no lights sweeping the sand, only the endless, empty space leading toward the black shape of a hangar far in the distance. I raised the camera, zoomed in. That's when I saw them. Not soldiers, not workers. They were people, but not exactly. Their movements were wrong, slow, unsteady, as if they were walking underwater. There were maybe 8 of them, spaced far apart, moving in the same direction, toward the hangar. None of them spoke, none of them looked up. One of them stopped. Even from that distance, I could see its head turn, not toward me, but toward something behind it. And then, it bent at the waist, unnaturally far, until its face was almost parallel to the ground. It stayed that way for 5 full seconds before straightening again. I don't know why, but my hands went cold. The hum was getting louder. I lowered the camera and listened. It was coming from the hangar, but it seemed to pulse, almost like breathing. I thought of the story one of the truckers had told me weeks ago about the man who'd worked here for 3 days, then disappeared. About how his wife had said his voice didn't sound like his anymore when he called her that last night. I wanted to leave. I should have left. Instead, I found myself looking for a way in. There was an access road leading from the main gate toward the hangar, but I stayed off it, keeping low, following the shadows of the small outbuildings that dotted the perimeter. Every so often, I saw motion far off. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap. It was coming from one of the smaller buildings to my right. The door wasn't locked. I stepped inside, the smell hitting me first. Metallic, sharp, mixed with something damp and stale. The room was lit only by a single green emergency bulb overhead. It wasn't an office or storage space. It was a narrow hallway lined on both sides with glass panels. Behind each panel was a chair. And in each chair, a person sat perfectly still, their heads tilted forward just enough that I couldn't see their faces. Tubes ran from the walls into their necks. Every few seconds, one of their fingers would twitch. Tap. I realized then what the sound was. Fingernails, striking the armrests. I should have backed out right then, but the hum was louder here. It was like it was inside the room, pressing against the air itself. I stepped closer to one of the panels. The figure inside looked normal. Civilian clothes, a man in his 30s, maybe. But when I leaned close, trying to see his face, his head snapped up so fast I actually stumbled back. His eyes were wide open. They weren't glowing. They were just wrong. Too still, too focused. And they weren't looking at me. They were looking through me. His mouth opened slowly, like the hinge of a heavy door, and in a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to a human throat, he said, "You shouldn't be here." The hum cut out. For half a second, the silence was total. Then every head in the hallway snapped upright at the same time. I didn't think. I ran. I don't remember leaving the building. I don't remember crossing the sand or the moment I realized I'd dropped the camera. I just remember reaching the truck and fumbling with the keys, the engine coughing twice before finally catching. In the rearview mirror, I saw movement near the fence. The slow-walking figures were gone. In their place, standing perfectly still, were three shapes, too far to see clearly but close enough that I could feel their eyes. I drove until the road blurred under the tires, until the fence and the sand were gone, until there was nothing but the empty highway ahead, and still, under the rumble of the engine, I could hear it. The hum, faint now, but there, following me. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Nevada desert at night, listen closely. Because if you hear that low, mechanical hum, you might already be too close. Chapter 5. The Last Door. The hum was still there, low, mechanical, endless. Alex pressed his palm against the cold steel of the corridor wall, feeling the vibration run up his arm. The lights overhead flickered, not in the random way of faulty wiring, but in a rhythm, almost like a signal. Ahead, the hallway split. Left, a narrow service passage, half lit and lined with pipes that dripped condensation. Right, a wide blast door painted a dull industrial gray. The door had no handle, no keypad, just a single black slot at chest height. Alex's pulse quickened. He remembered the rumors. The S4 Annex. The place even the Area 51 security didn't talk about. The stories of reverse-engineered craft, not of human origin. He took a step forward. The hum deepened, vibrating in his teeth. Somewhere behind that door, something was alive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ID badge he had stolen. It was still wet from the desert storm, the photo smeared. He slid it into the slot. A click. A hiss of hydraulics. The blast door began to part, only a few inches, and a blinding blue-white light spilled into the corridor. Then he heard it. Not machinery, not wind. Breathing. Slow, heavy, almost deliberate. Alex forced himself forward. The gap widened enough for him to slip inside. The temperature dropped instantly, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The room was vast, the ceiling lost in shadow, and in the center, suspended within a column of light, was something. It was not shaped like a human. It was tall, too tall, with limbs that bent wrong. Its skin, if it was skin, shimmered like oil on water. Tubes ran from its body into machines that pulsed with an alien rhythm. Its head turned, slowly. Alex froze. The thing tilted its head, and though it had no visible mouth, he heard it. A voice, inside his mind. "You shouldn't be here." The blue light surged. Pain shot through Alex's skull, his vision warped, the walls stretching, twisting. He saw flashes, a desert night, lights hovering silently above Groom Lake, a black-eyed figure watching from the shadows. And then, darkness. When he woke, he was outside. The sun was rising over the Nevada desert. His backpack, his recorder, his stolen badge, all gone. In his pocket was only a single item, a strip of metallic material, impossibly light, covered in symbols that shifted when he stared too long. In the distance, the sound of an approaching vehicle rumbled. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Nevada desert at night, listen closely. Because if you hear that low, mechanical hum, you might already be too close.